It's Kevin. Welcome to Relationship Ready. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it greatly. Today, we're going to talk about the cycle of violence. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about how we get into it, and we're going to talk about how we get out of it. The cycle of violence has been a theoretical framework that's been around for years and years. The power and control wheel, the cycle of violence. It's the abuse cycle. And we're going to broadly define abuse. But here's the definition of violence. Violence is a behavior involving physical force intended to hurt. That's the more traditional, agreed upon definition of violence. It is also the strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force. So violence is both a physical, an emotional, and a natural force. Violence is a problem for people and in relationships, and in communication, and in destroying our relationships, because violence hurts, and it hurts physically, emotionally, mentally, and hurts because it hits our triggers. The definition of a trigger is something that caused to happen or to exist. So, it didn't exist before, and now it does. And if we've been through a traumatic event, if we've been a victim of violence, if we've been a survivor of violence, then there is a button that is installed in us. It is our trigger to fight or flight, to scare us, to hurt us. So that when other things look like or appear to be like the triggers that we have, then they're activated. And the part of our brain that kicks us into fight or flight is activated. And that sets off or continues the cycle of violence. So what is the cycle of violence? The cycle of violence is a building of tension. It is an incident that breaks the tension and is the crisis point. It may be physical, it may be emotional, but it's an incident. That may be where the trigger is activated. It is a time of reconciliation where the perpetrator of the violence oftentimes will feel guilty in that moment, will apologize, will say it's never going to happen again, will say it's not me, will say it's their own triggers, and then a period of calm where it is both accepted for the participants in that cycle of violence that, oh, it's going to be fine for now. But if there's a cycle of violence that continues and it's established, that is just a tock on the tick of the clock to lead to when the next tension builds again and another incident occurs. And that's what makes it the cycle. Just keeps going of tension, incidents, reconciling, and being like, oh, this can be better, and then a period of calm. Now, we all have those times of periods in our lives, but the difference is in relationship, we keep walking through the cycle of violence and are stuck in it. So how do we get out of the cycle of violence? Well, first we need to be aware that it's happening. And we need to admit to ourselves. It may not be safe to admit to our partners, to the perpetrators, that it is violence. Or if you may be acknowledging the violence that they have, but they may not be willing to acknowledge it. Especially if it's more emotional or mental violence, because that's control. Because power and control is what the cycle of violence is about. It is activated because people feel powerless, and so they need to gain some sort of power. And if they can't have power over themselves, then they look for power over others, which is not true power, because true power is power over ourselves. But false power and the driving force of the cycle of violence is power over others, which is an attempt at feeling more powerful. It doesn't actually work because it's like a bucket with a hole in the bottom where you have an incident, you build up, you intimidate, you yell, you scream, you financially manipulate, you emotionally manipulate, and it feels powerful in a moment. But then it sinks right out and flows out of the bottom of the bucket, and you need to continue to fill that bucket to feel that power, because it's false power, it's not real. And that's what drives individually the cycle of violence for continuing. And what drives it in relationship is someone to feel powerful over. So self-worth, self-confidence is the most powerful tool against the cycle of violence. You cannot be affected by someone who you don't let yourself care less than about enough to continue to be victimized. Because once you're aware, you have a choice. And at every stage of the cycle of violence, whether it's building tension, right after the incident, in reconciliation, or in calm, there's an out. And knowing there's an out at every stage of the cycle of violence is vital to be able to pursue that out. Sometimes it's a hard way to get out. Sometimes there's a loss or things you need to give up. Or there's an attachment to the aggressor that you need to be able to let go of because it feels like love or it feels like connection. But what it is may be the best definition of love that you or they have ever had, but it is love of the power, not love of you. And that's the really hard thing to make it difficult and sometimes impossible and dangerous to not be able to get out of the cycle of violence. Now, this cycle might be incredibly physically and emotionally violent, of hurting and physical and bruises and killing someone ends up many times. It might be emotionally brutally wounding them, calling names, isolating, presenting disappointment consistently, presenting lack of care and saying, you don't care about me, as tools of control. And that's what maintains and manifests the cycle of violence. So how do you get out? Build your own self-worth and self-confidence. Build your own social supports in a safe as way as you can. You need to get comfortable with confronting. If the person you're confronting, if the partner you're confronting, if the connection you're confronting isn't comfortable with confrontation and comes back with violence, it's not safe to confront. It's a sign that you need to step out. And when I say step out, it might be stepping out of the relationship or it might be stepping out of the moment. And how do you step out of the moment? Active listening. Oh, so you're angry. Oh, so you're upset. Oh, so you don't like this. Maybe we can talk about this in 10 minutes. Maybe we can talk about this in 20 minutes. I need to go for a walk right now. I need to get out of the house for a little bit and then we'll resolve this. Those are all ways to get out. It's not easy. But if you can't get out verbally and physically, it's more dangerous to go back. And that's what is essential about understanding and moving through the cycle of violence. If emotionally, because you're like, I never get hit, there's never any threats, but emotionally, if you are name called consistently, and there's a cycle of tension, the incident is name calling, there's a reconciliation of apology, and then there's a calm, that's still the cycle of violence. Now you can choose to be in that if there's progress, if it happens less often, and if you can tolerate it and handle it and manage your own triggers, or you can choose to get out of that argument, that conversation, or that relationship. Because safety is the number one thing to maintain trust and build relationship and be more relationship ready. So what did we learn today? Learn about the cycle of violence we talked about. Many of you know on some level because we've all experienced some form of violence. We talked about definitions of both violence and triggers. We talked about what the stages of the cycle of violence are, with the building of tension, the incident, the reconciliation, and the calm. And we talked about how to get out: self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, supports, and finding it out through confronting yourself and then safely confronting your others and delaying till you build up your resources and support yourself and allow others to support you, to have more healthy relationships. Because people can change if they choose to, but we can't make them change. So that's a little bit about the cycle of violence. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Relationship Ready.